My name is Brandon, but my friends usually call me Smandon. This story begins on a rainy spring day. A day no different from any other day in my small hometown. Wake up, smoke a bowl, and head to school. Same old, same old. Only this time, a particular person had a surprising confession prepared for me in 6th period. Her name was Nicki. Not a very interesting woman, to say the least. The only thing that stood out about this boring female was her abnormally large gut, and a repulsive gravel switch accent.
"Hey cutie pie,"
Nicki called. My ears were pierced by her howl, and my eyes watered after merely glancing at the humongous growth on her stomach. Hey Nicki. Do you need something?
"Nuh-uh, just thought ye looked pretty cute,"
she howled. Oh. Thanks. The class carried on in silence after this painfully awkward exchange, but I thought nothing more of it. But my peace and quiet was soon interrupted by the screeching woman once more.
"Hey Brandon, do ye want my number? We can hang out or something."
I took a second to respond, trying to come up with the best excuse so that I wouldn't have to give such a hideous woman my number. My dad doesn't let me have service. The words came out jumbled and lacking confidence, but I hoped that she would get the hint and back off. She didn't.
"I can just have ye Snapchat."
I hadn't seen this one coming, but I always have an excuse ready regardless. I don't have Snapchat anymore. I hoped that excuse would be the end of it.
"Well then how's about we?"
The school bells cut her off, and class was dismissed. I really was saved by the bell, and got out of that class before she could prod me any further. I thought that would be the end of it for today, and for the most part it was. That is until I was riding the bus home. I'm one of the last people off, and at this time there were only about 5 or 6 people left on the bus including me. I was just relaxing and listening to music with my Oakley shades on when I noticed an abnormally large figure in the corner of my eye. I only caught a glimpse before it registered in my brain and I made a double take, but by then it was gone. I could have sworn something was there, and it almost looked like Nicki, but the day was long and I was worn out after not smoking a bowl for 8 hours, so I just summed it up to my mind playing tricks on me. After getting off of the bus, I beelined to my bedroom for my daily afternoon ritual of smoking a bowl and passing out until dinner time. Today was rough and exhausting after having to converse with such an obnoxious woman for so long, so I only smoked a pound of weed instead of my usual 2, and dozed off soon after. I woke up in a sticky sweat. I'm sure I dreamt of something, but that was long forgotten, and I was only left with the aftermath of what must have been a terrifying nightmare. It was night time. Unfortunately, I slept past my dinner, which usually consisted of a ham and cheese sandwich with Funyuns, but I was perfectly fine with leftovers too. However, when I entered the kitchen, I was not met with my ham and cheese wrapped in tin foil, but was instead met with the bloody remnants of my mom and dad. I was stunned, too shocked to move, but after what felt like hours, I managed to stumble into the living room. I wish I hadn't. In the middle of my living room was none other than Nicki, devouring my dad's head, but she wasn't eating it with her mouth, but with her fucking stomach. It was split open and sucked on the insides of my dad's skull. The hole where her stomach used to be was being filled with his organs. I belched, and with surprising speed, she turned to face me.
"Hey cutie pie,"
she said, in an all too deep voice for a woman. And then, I woke up. My Snoopy clock read 7 p.m. I came to realize that the horrific scene I had just witnessed had all been some disturbing nightmare. Just as I was about to hop on Risk of Rain 2, the rooster crowed. It was time for dinner. I couldn't help but feel anxious about entering the kitchen after what I had just witnessed in my dream, but everything seemed to be back to normal after going downstairs. I shared a meal with my family, which is a very rare occasion, and then headed back upstairs to play some Risk of Rain. I joined Discord, played with the boys until 10, and then decided to call it a night. I said a silent prayer in hopes that I wouldn't have such an awful dream again, and hit the sack. After about an hour of restlessness, I decided to open the window for some fresh air. I should have just stayed in bed. Outside of my window was the behemoth, Nicki. Instead of eyes, she had dark holes where her eyes should have been. Even with nothing there, I could feel her staring into my very soul, which I didn't even think was real until that very moment. But in the same moment she appeared, she vanished. I could feel water welling in the corner of my eyes. How did she find me? How was she looking into my attic window? Where were her eyes? All of these thoughts hit me like a freight train, and I couldn't help but pass out from sheer disbelief. I woke up in a panic, and turned my head towards my window. Nothing was there, except for the rays of the morning sun. Little did I know, that was my last day of peace. Every day since then has been filled with fear. From sunrise to sunset. Everywhere I went, I saw her face in the corner of my eye, only for it to disappear a moment later. I was convinced that what I saw in my window that night was a simple delusion caused by my sleep haze. I'd had enough. After living in paranoia for weeks, I decided to confront Nicki, and finally turn her down. Each period passed painfully slow, as I was hyper-fixated on how to go about rejecting her. Surely a woman of her personality wouldn't take it so easily. When sixth period finally rolled around, I saw her. Even the slightest glimpse made me shudder. All I could think about were those empty sockets, staring back at me. I shook those thoughts away and tried to come up with a good way to reject her.
Hey handsome.
Oh. Hi, Nicki. There's actually something I wanted to tell you, if you don't mind.
Sure thing, say whatever you want, cutie pie.
My palms got sweatier by the minute, but I stood strong and decided that today was the day. Nicki, I just don't like you like that, so sorry. I'm just not interested, I sighed, and it felt like a boulder was lifted from my shoulders. My eyes were shut, waiting to get yelled at or degraded by the barbaric woman, but nothing came. After what seemed like 10 minutes, I opened my eyes. Nicki was staring back at me with a plain expression on her face. I couldn't help but feel that same feeling I felt when I saw her in my window, staring into my soul, but that was nothing more than a dream, right? She continued to stare, and I awkwardly shuffled my way out of the class. Even if school wasn't out yet, I wasn't going to stay in that room a second longer. I called my mom to pick me up, and got home without incident. Upon arriving home, I lounged around and smoked a bowl or two while I savored the feeling of being free from the woman's grip. I could finally get a good night's sleep after weeks of paranoia. Esports was today, so I waited for Mitchie to pick me up. An hour passed, and no Mitchie. This was strange, as Mitchie was a good Asian kid and was always on time, and even when he couldn't pick me up, he'd let me know in advance. I decided to just let my mom take me to esports, but by then the sun had already begun setting. I waved my mom goodbye, and shut the car door. The ATC was illuminated by street lamps, but it was damn near pitch black everywhere else. The nighttime wind was biting cold, as I walked towards the front door. The lights were off inside. The whole place felt dead. No distant voices, not anything. Strange, since esports was definitely today. I wandered the halls for a bit, until I finally arrived at the entrance of the esports room, which was the same room as my 6th period class. I knocked, but was met by silence. The door crept open from the weight of my knock, and I stuck my head inside. Standing exactly where she was earlier when I rejected her was Nicki. She stood, staring at me, not moving, hell not even breathing. Upon further inspection, I noticed a red figure on the floor. It was the disemboweled corpse of Mitchie. I screeched, and looked back at Nicki, who was now devoid of eyes, but I could still feel her staring at me, staring at my very soul. It wasn't a dream after all. All of it was real. I was full-on crying at this point and started frantically running down the dark halls. I usually know this place like the back of my hand, but the amount of stress I was under at the time messed up my memory, and I couldn't seem to find the exit.
Come back, cutie pie.
That thing demanded. I was a crying, stumbling mess, but I managed to see the distant light of a street lamp emanating from outside the ATC. I felt hope light up within me, even in such a hopeless situation, but that was short-lived, as Nicki was approaching at a surprising speed for a woman of her size.
Don't leave me.
I ignored that thing's call, and ran faster than I ever thought possible. I was about halfway down the hallway to the door, when I glanced back and noticed that her stomach was split open and a jumbled mess of what was left of Mitchie came spilling out of her gut. I could feel bile welling up inside me, and I could only imagine the terror Mitchie felt in his final moments. I somehow sped up even more after seeing such a monstrosity, and bursted right through those doors, and when I looked back, Nicki was nowhere to be seen. I kept running. Down the street, through yards, on the highway, it didn't matter as long as I was as far from that thing as possible. After running for 30 minutes straight, my body physically couldn't take it anymore and I collapsed. I sat on the side of the street with my thumb out, and was eventually picked up by a man in a truck. He drove me back to my place, and I began crying tears of joy. Finally I was safe. I couldn't help but find it strange that my mom hadn't called for me to come home by now, considering it was well past 8:30, but that hardly mattered to me at the time. I was just glad to be back. I opened up my creaky front door. "Mom, I'm home." No reply. I was fearing for the worst, but was met by a wave of relief when I saw her, facing away, and looking at the TV. "You scared me for a minute there, Mom. I thought something had happened to you. You won't believe what just happened today." So there was this girl who asked me outright. She kept bugging me about it day after day and I always just shrugged it off hoping she'd take the hint. Tears welled up in my eyes. But she never got it I guess, and then I had a dream you guys died and then I saw her and my windows without eyes. I felt a knot form in my throat. So I was overwhelmed with paranoia and couldn't sleep for weeks, so I decided to reject her so she'd finally get the hint. But then today I went to eSports but Mitchie didn't arrive, which was weird because Mitchie always came, but I went anyway, and then I couldn't speak anymore. It was too painful, because I knew that my mom was already dead, and that my death was decided the moment I stepped foot in my house.